introduce Tommaso Stefani. So Tommaso is a social and economic historian of the Ottoman Empire and the Mediterranean, with a focus on European-Ottoman diplomatic and commercial relations, comparative history of European and Islamic empires and legal and economic institutions, and also into religious relations during the Ottoman period. His doctoral dissertation was Commerce and Justice, Ottoman and Venetian Courts in Istanbul during the 17th century. You can read where he studied, a distinguished career in the leaflet, but without further ado, I would like to welcome Tommaso to talk about resilience and change in Venetian merchants in Istanbul after the loss of Cyprus.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you, Professor Vera Costantini and the other member of the Levantine Heritage Foundation for inviting me today. Today I'm going to talk about Venetian merchants in Istanbul between the Peace of Cyprus in 1573 and the War of Crete in 45, sorry. So it's a history of what I'm going to talk today is a history of all continuities and important changes in the conduct of trade, the goods exchanged, the identity of the merchants, and the commercial policy of Venice. This period of the study was a crucial period in the history of Venice and the Levant in general. So for the last time, in this period, Venice was a major commercial actor in the trade between Europe and the Levant. It was the first commercial part of the Ottoman Empire. At the same time, in this period, the commercial preeminence of Venice began to decline due to the competition of Northern European merchants, a crisis of its shipping industry, a major political instability in the Ottoman Empire, and also changes in the global pattern of trade. So focusing on the Venetian community of Istanbul, the largest in the whole Ottoman Empire, allows us to see how Venetian authorities and merchants reacted to changing international political and economic circumstances. I will begin with the protagonist of Venetian Ottoman trade in Istanbul and later move to Venetian commercial policies, the goods exchange, and the form of business. So first of all, how big was the Venetian community in Istanbul in the period after the War of Cyprus? So this is a district of Galata, as you can see in this picture, where all the Venetian and other European merchants reside in Istanbul. Usually the merchants stayed within the walls of Galata, they're all the Genoese colonies, where the embassies were north of Galata. So according to an Ottoman census, Tahrir, of the foreign communities residing in Galata in 1616, the Venetian community had 108 individuals. It was the largest European group in Istanbul at the time. The French, the Dutch, and the English together amounted to 56 individuals. Of course, this classification of who is a Venetian, who is not, is not straightforward. For example, the Ottoman, they didn't consider as Venetians all the Venetian subjects from the Levant, from Crete, from Tinos, from Greek islands. According to the Ottoman, they were not part of the Venetian community. So what the Ottoman counted as Venetian were all the people coming from Venice and the Terraferro. Of course, the Venetian, they uphold this view of the Venetian community. For them, of course, the Venetian subjects from Crete were Venetian subjects, were part of the Venetian community. So who was a Venetian merchant in Istanbul after the War of Cyprus? In this period, the social and economic profile of the Venetian mercantile community changed. In the Venetian trading system in the early modern period, two factors affected the conduct of trade. First, since the 14th century, Venetian laws of citizenship had forbidden non-Venetians from engaging in trade between the city of Venice and the Levant. Non-citizens were the vast majority of the people living in Venice, in its territories, in the Balkans and in the Levant. Only three categories of people: the noble, the sub-elite group of the cittadini originari, and those who acquire citizenship right, the privilege, the citizenship diritto di destra, could participate in these commercial exchanges. Also, in Venice, in its territories, merchant guilds and chartered trading companies did not exist. So therefore, merchants were not a legal category, but were a social and professional group. So being a Venetian in Venice and its mercantile communities was a social and occupational status and not a legal one. Also, the Venetian government did not allow the creation of corporative bodies like trade companies. And the Venetian government basically remained the exclusive representative of Venetian trade, issued legislation and negotiating with the Ottoman authorities on the behalf of private merchants. So the period I'm working on, after the War of Cyprus, the legislation on trade and citizenship remained in effect. However, commercial economic development in the Mediterranean affected the social economic profile of Venetian merchants in Venice and its mercantile communities in the Mediterranean. In the second half of the 16th century, Ottoman-Venetian wars, the rise of piracy and the growing competition of merchants from Northern Europe made trade with Levant a riskier activity and reduced the prospect of profit. One of the consequences of all these developments was that Venetian nobles stopped engaging in personal trade with Levant. So this phenomenon has been the focus of a long debate in this historiography of Venice, especially about the role of the abandonment of trade by nobles in the decline of Venice. So what just I need to say here is that current research demonstrates that nobles actually continue to trade with the Levant through commercial agents and invested in shipping and in maritime insurance. So for example, in a document from the Cinque Salve della Mercanzia, the Venetian Board of Trade from 1610, this document shows that there were still 83 nobles engaging in the Levantine trade, not in person but through commercial agents. So there is still a huge investment of the Venetian nobles in the Levantine trade in the 17th century, at least in the beginning. So the void left by nobles was filled by other group of Venetian citizens, such as the cittadini originari and the citizen by privileges, but also by non-citizens, such as colonial subjects, and also by subjects of other states. Since the early 16th century, Venice started not to enforce its legislation on citizenship and trade rights. So many Greeks from Venetian islands in the Levant started to engage in shipping, money lending, and trade between Venice and the Levant. And they also traded with other states, such as England and Holland. At the same time, the commercial and diplomatic agreements between the Venetian and Ottoman governments, the capitulation, allowed Ottoman merchants to trade in Venice. Since 1541, Sephardic Jews from the Ottoman Empire, called Levantine Jews, obtained trade rights in Venice, with charters called the Condotte. And also Muslims from the Balkans and Anatolia began to trade with Venice. So to sum up, trade between Venice and the Levant became more open to economic actors belonging to different political and religious communities, and also having a different legal status. So why did Venice allow colonial subjects and foreigners to engage in trade with the Levant? After all, the business activities competed with those of Venetian citizens. A long tradition of scholarship has considered this development as a symptom of Venetian political and commercial decline. More recent scholars such as Maria Fusaro have convincingly demonstrated that the opening of the Levantine trade to non-citizens had allowed the continuous activity and prosperity of the port of Venice in a period of diplomatic and commercial difficulties in the Mediterranean. So what was most important for Venice was preserving the flow of Levantine goods to Venice for re-export or to support Venetian industries, and also to benefit from customs duty from trade. So all the changes I briefly mentioned here were reflected in the Venetian community of Istanbul after 1573. In October 1616, the Venetian ambassador in Istanbul, the Bailo, convened the Council of the 12th, the government body of the Venetian community of Istanbul, to discuss foreign trade issues. So 22 merchants participated in this meeting. None of them was a noble. Among them, only one was a cittadino originario, 3 were citizens by privilege, while the rest, 18 individuals, were not citizens at all. Among these non-citizens, there were also Ottoman subjects. So the participants of this meeting I just mentioned show the great social and economic heterogeneity of the Venetian merchant community in Istanbul in this period. The rules of Venetian citizenship played a role in Istanbul in determining who could trade with Venice. Being recognized as a Venetian merchant in Istanbul depended mostly on the actual practice of trade, connection with Venetian citizens, the payment of consular duties, and the respect of the authority of the baile. Some individuals applied to Venetian citizenship after years of working as commercial agents in Istanbul, while others never applied to citizenship. So most of the merchants trading with Venice after the War of Cyprus were commercial agents, fattori, who operated with capital entrusted them by Venetian citizens, including numerous nobles. Court records from the Venetian consular called the Cancelleria are full of information about the principal of the merchants in Istanbul. Between 1590s and 1630s, the year during where I focus my research from my dissertation, in this period the largest group of merchants, of Venetian people identified as Venetian merchants in Istanbul, came from either Venice or Bergamo in the terraferma. The reason of the great presence of Bergamaschi was that Bergamo, like Venice itself, in the second half of the 16th century became an important center for the production of high-quality woolen textiles. Families of wool workers from Bergamo became engaged in the trade with the Ottoman Empire, sending family members, usually young brothers, to Istanbul to conduct trade, while senior family members remained in Venice. Instances of Bergamaschi in Istanbul were the famous Ragazzi, Orlandi, and Zois. The members of these families were active until the 1630s and engaged not only in textile trade but also in the trade of precious stones and in shipping activities. At least one of the members of this family obtained citizenship, the intus est, becoming citizen by privilege. Among individuals recognized as Venetian merchants, there were also individuals born in Istanbul or in the Ottoman Empire who were legally Ottoman subjects. For instance, the Pironi family. The Pironi family was a family of Genoese descent living in Gatta. In the 16th and 17th century, members of this family conducted trade in silk and wool with Venice, bought ships sailing to Venice, and took part in the decisions of the Council of 12. They pay consular duties and also they pay consular duties to the baile. They also provide dragomans to Venetian merchants and ambassadors, and they were protected by Venetian baile in case of problem with Ottoman authorities. They never applied to Venetian citizenship. There were no evidence so far that this member of this family ever went to Venice. But still they played an important role in the socio-economic life of the Venetian community of Istanbul in the 17th century. So these individuals were legally Ottoman subjects. Ottoman fiscal record registered them as paying Ottoman taxes such as the jizya, the Islamic tax paid by non-Muslims. In Ottoman court documents, record them as zimmites, that is non-Muslim Ottoman subjects. However, this did not stop them from being considered by the Venetian baile as part of the Venetian mercantile community in Istanbul. Another important group of merchants imposed after the War of Cyprus were Greek Venetian subjects from Crete. They were mostly small-scale merchants who brought to Istanbul a variety of agricultural products, including the famous Malvasia wine from Crete. They usually did not trade with Venetian merchants from Venice or the terraferma, while they established trade network with Greek communities in Istanbul. However, they appealed to the Venetian authorities to obtain legal certificates called bollettini about the Venetian subjecthood, so that they paid basically lower custom duties in the Ottoman Empire, and they were protected by the baile in case of problem with the Ottoman authorities. Some of these people from Crete engaged in the wine trade with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the Black Sea. Despite being close to foreign shipping since the 15th century, numerous Cretan subjects of Venice went to the Black Sea to export wine for the Polish market and to buy caviar, sturgeon, and codfish. They used Istanbul as transit port for this trade between Crete and the Black Sea ports and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In the 16th and 17th century, the Divided Istanbul appointed Greeks from Crete as Venetian consul in ports like Kaffa in Crimea, to the Theodosia, Kilia in the delta of the Danube in Moldova, and also in Lviv in Polish-Lithuanian territory, today in Ukraine. So we have little knowledge so far of this trade of Venetian subjects in the Black Sea. And one of the reasons is that many of the survivor records about this trade comes from the Venetian consular court, which is not very used by so far by scholar work on Venetian trade. And also a lot of sources about this Black Sea trade of Venetian subjects is also in Ottoman sources, in Ottoman court records of Istanbul, which are usually very little used by scholars of Venetian trade. One example of Ukrainian merchants from Crete is the Veveri family. The Veveri family was a family of merchants from Rethymnon, and they engaged in wine trade between Crete and Poland, and they imported to the Ottoman Venetian territories sturgeon, caviar, and codfish. They established business relations with both Venetians and Ottoman subjects as official, and also with a member of the Principate of Moldova. When they faced problems with Ottoman authorities and pirates in the Black Sea, they appealed to the Venetian bylaw for protection. So, for example, in 1606, Giovanni Battista Veveri was captured by the Cossacks, and he was freed through the intervention of the bylaw. Giovanni's son, Costantino, married the daughter of a Moldovan prince, Hospodar, and became the chief customs official of Moldova in the 1620s. So can we call this individual from Crete, this Cretan-based Venetian merchant? They did not trade with Venice itself. They did not take part in the governance of the Venetian community in Istanbul. They were never recorded as Venetian merchants in Ottoman courts, in Venetian courts record. They did not take part in the main Venetian mercantile networks connecting Venice and the Levant, but they created new extensive network with Ottoman subjects and authorities. However, in the case of need, the Venetian bailey acted as judges in the commercial disputes and protected the trade vis-à-vis Ottoman authorities, and collected from the council duties for the trade and shipping activities. So just to sum up, after the War of Cyprus, the Venetian community in Istanbul became more socially variegated, with individuals belonging to different ethnic, social, economic, and political communities. They both continue all the established commercial networks or created new ones with Venetian territories in the Levant and other foreign states. So despite the main difference between all these different economic operators of these merchants, they all sought to be identified as Venetians in Istanbul in order to enjoy fiscal and legal privileges in the Ottoman Empire and to be protected by the Venetian bylaw in case of problem with Ottoman authorities. So, how did these changes in the composition of Venetian community in Istanbul affect Venetian commercial policies, the practice and the institution of trade in the Ottoman capital, and also the type of has changed? The diminished role of nobles in the Levantine trade did not affect Venetian commercial policies in the Eastern Mediterranean. Until the 16th century, the nobles were the most important group of merchants trading with the Levant. At the same time, they were members of the Venetian government. As a consequence, the interests of the economic elite coincided with those of the Venetian government. Despite the departure of the nobles from the practice of trade, the Venetian government was strongly committed to the promotion of non-noble Venetian merchants in Istanbul and elsewhere in the Levant. During the 16th century, the Cinque Stelle Mercanzia, the already mentioned Venetian Board of Trade, continued to expand its competencies in supporting Levantine trade. It acquired competence over shipping, type of custom duty, taxation of goods, regulation of middlemen, sali, the fight against contraband, commercial treaty, Venetian council, and foreign merchants. Also, Venetian officials created and supported new trade routes to face the rising risks of piracy and to take advantage of new business opportunities. As professional Professor Costantini will describe later, the Venetian officials, together with Ottoman authorities in Bosnia, supported the creation of the Port of Split in Dalmatia and new lane roads between Istanbul and the Adriatic coast. As also already mentioned, the Venetian Empire supported the creation of new trade routes in the Black Sea by supporting them through councils in this region. However, apart from creating and supporting new trade routes, there was the general continuation of the Venetian policy towards the Levantine trade and merchants. The laws on Venetian citizenship and trade remain in place, despite they were not enforced in Venetian territories in the Levant. Second, in 1602, the Senate issued a decree on navigation that reconfirmed previous laws protecting Venetian shipping. According to this decree, Venetian ships in Istanbul and other Levantine ports, where there was a Venetian consul, had to give the precedence in being loaded with goods related to Venice. Furthermore, the French ships coming to Venice from the Levant had to sell goods in Venice and could not use Venice as a transit port, like Bordeaux was at the time. Venice never became a free port in this period. Scholars consider this regulation as responsible of the kind of Venetian trade in the 17th century, because it prevented many West European merchants from using Venice as a transit port to the advantage of Livorno and Rome. Also, as already mentioned, Venice did allow the creation of trading companies, like joint stock companies in the early modern period. And the Venetian government remained the main exclusive representative of Venetian commercial interests in the Levant. Also, basically the Venetian government actively protected diplomatically the trade of Venetian merchants, but allowed them a great freedom to buy, set the prices, and select commodities. The Venetian policy was contrasted with the English, the strongest competitor of Venice in the 17th century. The English set up the Levant Company, a chartered company that enjoyed a royal monopoly over British trade in the Levant and determined commercial politics. Important continuities remain also in the practice of the day-to-day practice of trade. Venetian merchants in Istanbul continue to conduct wholesale trade. They brought to Istanbul goods to be sold in the commercial zone of Galata to wholesale Ottoman merchants organized in guilds and stuff. They could not sell their goods in shops because Ottoman guilds opposed this practice and monopolized retail trade. In the early 17th century, on several occasions, Venetian merchants traded to open shops in the Grand Bazaar of Istanbul and in the covered market Venetian of Galata to sell woolen clothes. But they faced the opposition of local Jewish wool merchants who applied to Ottoman authorities to have the shops kept by Venetian closed. At least in Istanbul, Venetian merchants could not penetrate local trade networks. They had to sell their goods to Ottoman merchants. Second, also in the form of business association in Istanbul, at least in the 16th and 17th century, this form of business association remained similar to those employed in the late Middle Ages. So Venetian merchants in Istanbul organized themselves in family partnership called fraterna, in which each member had full managerial power and unlimited liability. And they represented one another with third parties. Usually two brothers operated in Istanbul, while their father or their other brothers remained in Venice. Another form of business organization was the company, a joint venture between 2 or 3 strangers with equal liability. It had limited duration and specific tasks. The short-lived companies allow merchants to diversify the investment in different trade ventures, in different goods, in order to limit risks. A last important form of association was the commission agency, in which a commission agent in Istanbul received goods and traded them for a principal in Venice, receiving a commission of usually 2% of the profit. All these forms of association were shared by all Venetian merchants, from Venetian citizens to exarchs in the Levant. So overall, in the matters of form of business association, Venetian merchants were traditionalists in comparison with other European merchants in the early modern period. They did not develop chartered companies or general partnerships like the English, Dutch, and Florentine merchants, They did not engage in banking or finance like the old Genoese rivals. However, according to scholars from Frederick Lane to Isabella Cecchini more recently, this combination of a semi-permanent family partnership and companies of short duration allow Venetian merchants a degree of management flexibility and contribute to the commercial dynamism of Venice. Also, Venetians, like in the late Middle Ages, they kept trading in different goods. They never specialized in specific merchandise. So what did Venetian merchants in Istanbul trade after Cyprus? Again, we have both strong continuous and changing in the period after 1573. So like in the Middle Ages, from Venice to Terraferma, Venetian merchants brought to Istanbul first different types of Venetian silk, woolen and cotton fabrics and cloth produced in Venetian industries. They were high quality and expensive goods, and they were destined to well-to-do Ottoman officials and members of the Ottoman dynasty. So if you go to the Topkapi Palace today, you can find a wonderful collection of kaftans, which were ceremonial robes worn by the Sultan. Many of these kaftans were made from Venetian textiles, above all from velvet. Furthermore, Venetian luxury textiles were important instruments of diplomacy, and they were used by the Bali as gifts to Ottoman authorities during negotiations. The trade of Venetian textile and cloth was the strongest sector hit by the English competition in the 17th century. English merchants imported cheaper, though lower quality textiles, which became popular in the Ottoman Empire from the late 16th century. I have to say that in the period work in the first 30 years of the 17th century, I didn't find in the Venetian dispatch these records from the Venetian, these letters sent by the Venetian ambassador from Istanbul to Venice. I didn't see any mention of this like English competition. And I saw sometimes the Venetian complain about like custom duties, the English enjoying lower custom duties, but I didn't find very much instances of this English competition, which in historiography was stressed as one of the reasons of Venetian decline. Other important popular Venetian goods were glassware and mirrors from Murano, which were used in the house of the wealthy Ottomans and in the mosques. So in this picture on the left, you can see these are glasses from the mosque of Istanbul, which was terminated in 1616. Once, not today, unfortunately, and stained window glasses coming from Murano. So the Venetian imported expensive goods to Istanbul, and they bought mostly textile raw materials like wool, cotton, mohair, and silk to be used in the Venetian textile industries. They also purchased products of Ottoman manufacturers, such as the kamla, that's called zardadot in the Venetian source, woolen cloths made of the goat's hair in Ankara. They were quite popular in Europe in the early modern period. Another Ottoman industrial goods were Anatolian carpets. They were produced in specialized Ottoman urban workshop in Bursa and other cities. Important sources of the goods brought to Istanbul and exported to Venice are the inventories of the estates of Venetian merchants who died in Istanbul. For instance, in June 1630, the merchants from Bergamo, Geronimo Agosti, died in Galata, leaving many goods that became a matter of dispute between Venetian and Ottoman heirs. Venetian Ottoman authorities drew the inventory of the goods of Geronimo, which is kept in both Venetian and Ottoman sources. In the Ottoman sources, I mentioned in the court record, in the entire record of the Cadi of Galata, which was a judge in public note in Istanbul. So, according to this inventory, these merchants, they traded in more than 80 different goods, including Venetian fabrics, clothes, different varieties, silk and wool, mirror, glassware, silverware, camlets, carpets from Anatolia, cloths, gilded chest, copper vessel, and even bags of tobacco. So this inventory will show the number, a great number of all these goods which are traded by Venetian merchants in Istanbul. So far, all the goods I described were exchanged between Venice and Istanbul. In this period, as I already mentioned, there was also a lot of agricultural products coming from Crete. This is also a continuation of all medieval pattern of products from Crete coming to agricultural products coming from Crete to Istanbul, like olives, raisins, honey, lemon, juices for the local market. What was new in the period I'm working on is this trade of wine, caviar, and sturgeon between Crete, Istanbul, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Malvasia wine was very sought by the Polish nobility, and Cretan merchants brought this to the town of Lviv in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, while caviar and sturgeon were purchased by Cretan merchants in the ports in the delta of the Danube, like Kilia and Ismail. And they were exported to Istanbul and from there to Venice through land roads from the Balkans. Another important novelty in the period under study was the slave trade. So the century of the war of Crete, of Cyprus, was the golden age of corsaering in the Ottoman Empire, in the Mediterranean in general. So Christian and Muslim corsairs attacked commercial shipping in coastal towns in the western and eastern Mediterranean. Then most of prize were captives to be sold in a very profitable trade of captives and ransom between Christian and Muslim states. Istanbul was a major center of trade slaves coming from Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, the Mediterranean, and North Africa. Venetian merchants were much active in this trade. They ransomed both Christian slaves and also Muslim slaves which were detained in Christian states. So usually in the Venetian system, the Venetian value were responsible for the liberation of Venetian subjects, according to the capitulation agreements with the Ottomans. However, I found that there was also a lot of private entrepreneurs who engaged in ransom as a business activity. Much of this evidence on this slave trade comes from the record of the Islamic port in Galata. It is probably one of the reasons this trade is not very well known so far. In the 17th century, we have several instances of credit contracts between Venetian merchants and the relative of Muslim slaves kept in Malta, Livorno, and Messina. In such contract, so you have a Venetian merchant received a sum of money in advance to go to Malta and elsewhere to ransom Muslim slaves. For instance, in 1617, the merchant Paolo Di Antonio registered an agreement with Fatima Hatun, the wife of Mahmoud, who was kept in Messina as a prisoner, as a captive. Fatima committed to pay in advance 25,000 aspers a check to Paolo, and she probably was to pay him further 20,000 aspers after he managed to save her son. Two individuals, a Muslim and a Christian, stood surety that Paolo would repay Fatima Hatun in the event he failed to rescue her son. 2 years later, Paolo and Fatima came again to the court of Galata to register the end of the transaction. So, in conclusion, the Venetian community in Istanbul in the decades after those of Cyprus remained a major European mercantile group thanks to new and old trade partners and networks and the continuous state support. In order to preserve the importance of the port of Venice in the age of growing foreign competition, Venetian officials promoted and protected new trade routes and relaxed restriction over non-citizens in the trade between Venice and the Levant. They allowed new mercantile groups, the Greeks on Crete and Ottoman subject, to engage in long-distance trade. The Venetian merchants in Istanbul became an heterogeneous group of individuals with different social and economic profile and different relations with Venetian officials and citizens in the Levant and in Venice. They continued all pattern of trade, such as the trade of luxury Venetian industrial products, but they also took part in new trade opportunities such as the Black Sea and ransoming trade. They also preserved all practice of trade, such as the use of family partition and short-lived commercial ventures. So with new and old trade networks, continuous trade support and traditional form of business, Venetian merchants managed to remain major political and economic player in the Levant in the 16th century until the War of Crete. This resilience did not hide the fact that since the 17th century, the English, the Dutch, and the French became more important commercial actors in the Eastern Mediterranean. However, the result shows how an old commercial power strove to maintain its importance in an age of substantial economic and political change. And thank you for your time.
Excellent, thank you. So, any questions? Yes.
Was it puzzled when the fact that you used caviar and sturgeon as a Venetian good, whereas you said that it came from the Black Sea?
Yeah.
It's not, maybe Venetian good was something that went the other way.
Yeah, I should have been more precise to say, I mean, good handled by Venetian merchant. Yeah, that's the one I wanted to say, yeah. But that's quite a new development, at least in base of the literature and my own research. The Black Sea until, I mean, according to most of the historiography, was closed to freight shipping when the Ottoman conquered Constantinople and the Genoese colonies in Crete, in the Crimea. But I found in the early modern period there was still a lot of Venetian settlers from Crete. They went there with their own ships even. So yes, and they engaged in trade of these new goods, like which before, at least to the current survey, were not very consumed, like in like caviar and sturgeon in medieval Venice, for example. So this is a new commercial development, which is very much unknown because most of the sources are in Ottoman archives about this trade also.
Can you describe white caviar?
That's a good question because in the Ottoman source they call it morina balde, which I don't know how it's called. About it or I'm not very.
Fish.
Yeah, but I don't.
That would be cold bacala.
Sturgeon, caviar. Actually, yeah.
Venetian.
Yes.
Thanks so much for this presentation. I have two questions. One is about historiography, the second is about textiles. For a long time, we've been in some of the important books about the Ottoman Empire, the Venetians and the Ottoman Empire, have been produced by historians who rely mainly on Venetian sources, even with Ottoman sources. But when you look at these presses from my perspective or your perspective, everything changes. For instance, they were legally treated more like a Dini community, like local Christians, rather than a Frankish nation. This is my viewpoint. And so I just wanted to, to what extent do you think this literature is still valid today? It's been more than 15 years since Castella's book, for instance, and other books like Ottoman. I don't know what's coming next, to what extent are we dealing with exactly the same thing when looking at this person from a Venetian perspective than when we're doing that from your perspective? This is the first question. Second question is about silk. Luca Moran has this very compelling view that in the Middle Ages Venice imported spices, and this is true, we all know that. And in the 16th century this time, and Venice started to import raw silk and to produce these sophisticated textiles according to the tastes of the Ottomans and Persians, and we export finished products. Okay, and these are big shift in economic history, and so I wanted to know more. You could elaborate a little bit on what happened when you've been sending these prestigious textiles and you've been dressing the emperors, the sultans, and then arrive these cheap textiles with the merchant, with the English merchants, and culturally, did have some kind of positive.
Well, thank you for your question. About the first one, what my contribution instead of the work of Gustav, which was, for his time, was very important, to quote that, this Venetian community very much more heterogeneous, people coming from different socio-economic backgrounds. You contribute to see also the Ottoman view of this on this Venetian community. Who was a Venetian according to the Ottomans? And this, for the Ottomans, for example, as already briefly mentioned at the beginning, they tend to see the Venetian status complete not as part of the Venetian community. They're not part of the Benedict type, the type of, they are zimmi according to the Ottomans. Of course, there is this in Ottoman administrative and some also corporate. And there is a tension with the Venetian. The Venetian, of course, rejected this classification of this individual as not Venetian. So in the period, this period is a negotiation of belonging to this community or not. And it's a period you don't have law of citizenship or throughout based on the territory in this time. There's no territorial-based notion of citizenship or a subject, whatever you want to call it. So determining the staff who is part of this movement or not was mostly dealt locally. The locality is very important. Who was a Venetian in Istanbul was different from who was a Venetian in Aleppo. So for example, in the 18th century, and say, a lot of Jews were considered part of the Venetian community. It is something you don't have, for example, in the 17th century Istanbul. But Aleppo was a different context. So there is still my research, my contribution will be to show this process of negotiation between the two sides and the Ottoman view of these trade groups coming from Europe, who is part of this privileged community, who is not. So that's my contribution to show this, how the Ottoman tried to restrict the number of people who obtain the status of it's legally called Muslimin, like member, for protected foreigner, this privileged status of the Ottoman Empire. But there's always a tension and there's always a negotiation till the 19th century. Even the late 19th century is still a dispute for who is a Venetian subject and who is not a Venetian subject. About silk, according to most of the historiographies that the Venetian started to decline, the Venetian the silk and all the industry started to decline when the English came, the Northern invasion came, the English and the Dutch, and they started to sell cheaper products, less quality but cheaper. And most historiography says that there is a theory that why they were successful is because the Ottoman is in the 16th century. The Ottoman elite was facing an impoverishment because the Ottoman Empire was a debasement of the currency. So if the Ottoman money valued very little, so they couldn't purchase Venetian textile anymore. This addition needs to be more empirical study has to be done on this to see if this theory is really the case. What I see in Venetian record from this dispatch, this lecture from the Venetian ambassador, I consider the Bible very much about this English textile competing with the Venetian one. You see a lot of this American, like this Geronimo Agosti in the 16th died in Ghana. He was importing tens of different varieties of Venetian luxury textiles. So there was still a market for these aspects. Maybe declining, but they were still involved. It was still very appreciated by Ottoman elites. Maybe not as in the past, but there was still a huge market there. Maybe declining. We need empirical studies about this, and quantitative study, of course. But still, there is much an interest on Venetian textiles in this period.
Excuse me, why did you use the term resilience?
Why? Because according to most of the historiography, there is in the late 16th century, most 17th century, there is still this process of decline, sudden decline. Until the early 17th century, Venice was the most important trade partner of the Ottomans, and they started to decline suddenly, facing English, mostly 17th century, later French competition. But according to Maurizio, this shows that they were still fighting back. The Venetian good was still very much important in the Ottoman Empire. There was still not a total decline. There was a resistance by the Venetian against these processes. And in all trade partners, like this luxury trade, was still very important. So I tried to reassess this so-called sudden decline. It's a long, complex phenomenon. And they also, the Venetian engaged in new different traits that they try to demonstrate. So there were different new traits also. These merchants, Geronimo Agosto, who died in 1630, also, he was also trading tobacco. Tobacco was a new commodity this time. So you see also the Venetian engaging with these new commodities now. And this, of course, we must study to see how they engage with this new commodity. What they want to, when you determine I want to say they fight back against this decline. And there is an active Venetian intervention against this decline.
Tommaso, I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on this concept of taking with a grain of salt the idea of competitors, that someone's taking over your market, right? And I'm asking you because I was thinking about some writings of Vino here in the 1640s, more or less, with Costantini. In a troubled moment in the relationship between the Ottoman and Venice, and he's taking out of his pocket and actually borrowing money in order to keep the trade of Venetian merchants towards Venice by using Jewish merchants. Right? They're not Venetian settlers. And so, like, thinking about the category of Venetian merchants as something that can be somehow defined, very precisely, and so also who's a competitor in this kind of blurred dimensions.
No, thank you for your question. I mean, I totally agree that, there's also, there's a recent historiography showing that, okay, the English, the English to Courtney Road, to the competitor of Venetians, but also this surplus, for example, Maria Fusari and work research shows that, they interact with the Greeks, for example, and through the Greeks, they kept the Greeks and the English together, they kept trading with Venice and the Ottoman Empire. So, sometimes what was important for Venice was keeping this, at least in the 17th century, keep open the port of Venice. We need goods, we need to, for taxation, we need to supply our interests. And so they allow all these non-Venetian merchants, non-Venetian citizens, like, as you mentioned, the Jews, the Turks. The Jews from Istanbul, when they sent the goods to Venice, they were in the same, they trade the same material as the Venetian merchants did, like raw material. All these Jews from Istanbul sending silk, raw wool, and cotton. So despite they compete in the sense, yes, because they trade the same goods. For Venice was good that you had this competition. So I think we need to reassess that the competition is this negative term, but I don't think this negative vibe. But I think from the point of view of the Ottoman state, it was good to have more actor interested in trading with Venice at the time. So I think we need to reassess what we need for a competitor as a. I think we can discuss it, maybe we can discuss it a bit later.
Any last questions or comments? No? Thank you very much, Tommaso. And for our last talk this afternoon, we have Vera Costantini, our co-host. So I'm delighted that we have the opportunity to finish the day with us. So Vera's background, connection from, I think, PhD, is that correct, in terms of the Ottoman conquest of Cyprus? So there is a link there. But Vera's been a long-serving member of Costantini. I think it was over 20 years, you said. Assistant Professor of Turkish Language and Literature. Also studied at Associate Research Fellow at Columbia University. And is currently Associate Professor here. She's passionately interested in Ottoman studies. I think there's absolutely no doubt about that. And I hope that this has helped to reinforce that passion. So without any more from me, can I invite you to do the presentation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Quentin, for introducing me and giving me the honor to conclude this session and this day of discussions. So, according to Gazi Fisrev, Sanjak Bey of Bosnia and founder of the city of Sarajevo, I quote, "Compliance with the rules of friendship and neighborhood," end quote, was the essence of the relationship with the Republic of Venice. While keeping vigil over newly appointed Venetian ambassador, octogenarian Pietro Zen, who had felt sick on his way to Istanbul and was now struggling between life and death, Fisrev Bey seized the opportunity to write the Doge Pietro Lando that, God willing, the two of them would become even better friends than he had been with his predecessor, Andrea Gritti. The letter, kept in the State Archives of Venice, was written in 1539 in the ambiguous aftermath of the Preveza battle, with the Venetian government trying hastily to re-establish peace with still indignant Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. In this context, Fisrev Bey's resort to, I quote, neighborhood rules in the text, Dostluk ve komşuluk hakkı, acquired a more specific relevance. Waiting for an agreement with Istanbul, the Doge could already count on Sarajevo, neighbor and therefore friend, implying that he felt as committed to building an alliance for the sake of mutual benefit as Pietro Lando should have been. After the death of Beyolu Albizegrit in 1534, of Pargalı Ibrahim Pasha in 1536, and this autograph is in a letter kept in the State Archives of Venice, a letter from Pargalı Ibrahim Pasha to the Doge, of Andrea Gritti himself in a portrait by Titian, and then of Pietro Zen in 1539 in Sarajevo, as I mentioned, Fisrev Bey remained the last of a generation that had set the conditions for a long-lasting peace between the Republic of Venice and the Ottoman Empire. These conditions were based on the premise that the struggle for dominance over the Balkans had been won decisively by the Ottomans. Throughout the 15th century, up until 1503, the Venetian government tried hard to interfere with the Ottoman expansion, in some cases through direct confrontations, as in Negroponte and Modone, or by supporting local elites in bloody civil wars, as in Serbia and Albania. On several occasions, Venetians even highlighted common interests with foreign rulers, such as Uzun Hassan in Tabriz, and once enemy Magyar kings, in order to establish alliances to the detriment of the Ottoman Empire. In this respect, Mahmud Pasha Angelovic, Grand Vizier of Fatih Mehmed II, on his way to the siege of the fortress of Smederevo, is reported by a Venetian chronicle to have told the Doge's envoy that, I quote, "One who wants to eat with somebody else's spoon ends up starving," end quote. As Philip wanted a sentence in Venetian, so here it is, "Chi vuol mangiare con sfugger d'altri, resta digiuno," with reference to the Veneto-Hungarian support to the anti-Ottoman local faction. Times had changed since the Kingdom of Hungary, among others, had competed with the Republic of St. Mark's in establishing control over the Western Balkans. In 1409, after half a century of fighting, the Neapolitan King Ladislav sold Dalmatia to the Venetian government for 100,000 ducats. The purchase agreement drawn and signed in the church of San Silvestro near Rialto, led to a decade of expansion and consolidation of the Venetian hegemony on the entire Adriatic region. In the meantime, the Ottoman dynasty, which had gained success over the Serbs in the Battle of Kosovo 1389, was experiencing one of the hardest times in its long history, with Sultan Bayezid I Yildirim defeated in Ankara and captured alive by Tamerlan. 50 years had to pass before the Ottoman state fully recovered and could focus back on the Western Front. And then, turning westwards, Sultan Murad II found an area where the Republic of St. Mark's had emerged as leading power over the Byzantines, the Magyars, and the Genoese. Therefore, it may be argued that at the time of their second and more decisive phase of conquests in the Balkans, the Ottomans found the Republic of Venice to be a crucial counterpart. Salonika fell in 1430, Morea 1460, Albania Negroponte in the following decade. When the Duke Ahmed Pasha sailed from Flore to Otranto and led incursions to Brindisi, Lecce and Taranto, he found a large wheat and oil producing region that Venetian traders and entrepreneurs connected to the southwestern Balkans, to Kerkyra, and of course to Venice. By the way, there were 400 Bergamaschi in the 15th century. In the meantime, as a consequence of Mehmed II's conquest of Constantinople, the Byzantine state had disappeared, and the Genoese colonies in the Black Sea and the Aegean had crumbled under the blow of Ottoman expansion. The last Ottoman confrontation of this phase happened between 1499 and 1503, and ended with the ports of Modone, Corone, Navarino, and Rač becoming part of Sultan Bayezid II's, I quote, well-protected domains, end quote. The most advanced and open-minded politicians of the Republican ruling class, such as Andrea Gritti and Pietro Zen, realized that the strategy of direct confrontation had grown useless and was nevertheless no longer sustainable. Having unified the previously fragmented Balkans in a cohesive system, military and administrative staff catchment area for the centuries to come, the Ottoman state was rising as the most powerful empire of the world. Westwards stood the Stato d'Amar of the Republic of Venice, at the beginning of the 16th century, still the leading economy of the world. In the third volume of Civilization and Capitalism, discussing the concept of world economy, Fernand Braudel wrote that Venice did not, quote, invent, quote, the Adriatic. Venice took control of a network of urban centers, local productions, and maritime exchanges that was already in place, and made of it what the French historian called a sort of national market. Indeed, a wide range of products was exported to Venice from Dalmatia and Ottoman Bosnia: salt, leather, wax, working animals, cheese, and wool. Some of these products served for the domestic consumption, while others, like wool and leather, for the urban-based textile and footwear industries. Salt, in particular, flowed so abundantly both from Dalmatia and Cyprus that the Serenissima became a center of further redistribution to continental Europe. Though pervaded by a harsh struggle for dominance and punctuated by periodic military clashes, the 15th century had also been characterized for the subjects of the Sultan and for the Republic by intense partnership, uninterrupted physical coexistence, active diplomacy, and significant episodes of cultural exchange, as already underlined by Philippe Manso this morning. At the beginning of the following century, when the Venetian propensity to compromise grew stronger, the consolidation of the partnership became the priority. Much emphasis has been put by historiography on commercial exchanges that effectively acquired an impressive volume, particularly in the capital and in Syria and Egypt, before and after Selim I's conquests. Nevertheless, historians need to remember that trade was only a chapter and often a consequence of a more complex game, whose major performance was played out, I believe, in the Western Balkans and ultimately in Istanbul. The proximity of the Ottoman Balkans to the Venetian territories and from there to the Dominante made it more profitable even for port cities ruled by the sultans such as Narenta and Makarska to sell their products to Venetian traders or to their local agents. This was especially true as far as salt was concerned. In 1531, Suleiman the Magnificent wrote to the lords of Venice that Mehmed, contractor of the revenues deriving from the sale of salt, multesim, salt and also maritime customs duties and various other tolls of the cities of Narenta and Makarska, was having trouble selling salt and other merchandise in Venetian Split and Trogir. Apparently, Mehmed Emin was also experiencing some difficulties in claiming the other taxes. The Kanuni, Suleiman, finished his letter ordering that, I quote, "Your men in Split and Trogir must give him assistance, as it happened in Shvenik and Kotor," end quote. The word used being muavenet, meaning help, assistance, there is no possibility of misunderstanding. 5 years later, from another letter sent by Suleiman to the Senate, we learn that the contractors of salt works located beside Nova and Kotor, though belonging to the Sultan, were the Venetian subjects. Surprisingly, tenders, iltizam, were not the only administrative procedure foreigners could be involved with. Venetian subjects were endowed with timars from wheat farms in Morea and windmills in Bosnia, apparently without any connection with military or paramilitary performances. Vice versa, in virtue of the island of Zakynthos' tributary status, part of its wheat and barley production was considered Hassihumayun, whose collection was entrusted to an Emin, who was a Greek subject of the Republic of Venice. Corfiots performed seasonal work in the Sultan's fish enclosures opposite their island. In this picture taken from the fortress of Lekrit in Albania, you see at the extreme right the island of Corfu, and opposite there's Butrinto. And the whole coast, the eastern coast of the Albanian shore was punctuated by fish enclosures. The list of transnational relations in the 16th century could go further. When the demarcation of respective territories overlapped geographic, human, administrative, and economic elements of structural continuity, occasions for misunderstanding and problems of public order could be always on the agenda. Numerous were the letters sent by the Sultan Suleiman to his administrative staff in Bosnia, Morea, and Albania, reporting complaints from the Bailo on behalf of Venetian subjects and functionaries who had been attacked or robbed by Levant or Hisar Erleri. Improprieties also happened the other way around, and the Sultan didn't neglect to point them out directly to the Senate. This mutual choice to correspond with the central government of the counterpart is a peculiar feature of the Ottoman-Venetian communication. The Capitani del Golfo, scornfully avoiding any request of face-to-face encounter advanced by Ottoman authorities based in the Albanian shores. Presenting itself as the champions of adherence to the rules, the Venetian government would ask its captains to patrol the Adriatic in the name of a cohesive sense of institutional loyalty that the Ottoman central government was forced to join and support. I believe that the strategic importance attributed by the Venetians to the Adriatic and to its eastern shores is one of the reasons why Ottoman Bosnia should not be considered a periphery of the empire throughout the early modern age, in spite of its borderline position. Emphasis on the issue of security becomes even more understandable since the reason used by the Sheikh Islam Abu Sud Effendi in the fatwa supporting Selim II's 1570 declaration of war against the Republic of Venice was precisely connected to the accusation of having sheltered Christian pirates on the Cypriot shores. During the War of Cyprus, Dalmatia became a battlefront, with incursions from both sides that implied a redefinition of the Serhad of the border in the aftermath of the peace agreement in 1573. The negotiations that led to the stipulation of a separate peace treaty between the Republic and the Empire had the effect of reshaping Venetian foreign policy through an overturn of the previous alliances. The unilateral decision to distance itself from the Holy League was taken out of dissatisfaction with the failed defense of Cyprus and the urgent need to find official solutions for Venetian traders and diplomats who, since the outbreak of the war, were living in Ottoman cities in precarious circumstances. Was the Venetian elite aware of the long-term effects that the Ottoman conquest of Cyprus would have in the southeastern Mediterranean? In the last decades of the 16th century, a spectre was haunting Venice, the spectre of newness. Openness to new projects did not come without knowing that an old system was growing obsolete. The first trading nation established in the Ottoman province of Cyprus had been Venetian, whose example, nevertheless, was followed a few decades later by the English and the Dutch trading companies. Since the loss of Cyprus had erased the premises of a direct access to a number of natural resources, new strategies were required by Venetian traders in order to compete with their new rivals, who were selling new and cheaper products, as has already been pointed out by Tommaso. In the 1580s, the Venetian government tried to establish a new arsenal in Crete, with the aim of launching the construction of galleons, which, however, proved to be inadequate for Mediterranean navigation techniques. Furthermore, the letters of the consul in Cairo in 1580 from the provinces, you can see the rivulry much more clearly than in Istanbul, I think, report highly perturbed business conditions for Venetian merchants, at a time that was, after all, of rapid expansion for Egyptian trade, see Naliana's book on Abu Takia, for example. Circumstances seem to push Venetian commercial recovery away from the eastern Mediterranean, southeastern Mediterranean at least. Although a complete withdrawal from traditionally important markets such as Aleppo and Cairo would never occur, during and after the War of Cyprus, conditions evolved that led to a diminished relevance of the Venetians in the Levant and an increased spectrum of trading possibilities on the Adriatic Sea, whose southeastern edge had already become a frequent stop-by area for dried fruit-seeking English merchants, as we already mentioned Maria Fusaro and Gigliola Pagano, the Vivizis, have pointed out in their researches. This was the context when a Jewish merchant of Portuguese origin named Daniel Rodriga presented to the Senate of the Republic a project to establish an international port in the Dalmatian city of Split. The proposal was immediately taken into consideration and ultimately accepted by the authorities. Rodriga's project was to apply a low custom and even duty-free policy in order to attract Ottoman goods to Split rather than to any other Eastern Adriatic port. As Split was formally part of the Venetian Stato da Mar, ships would have had to sail from there to the Serenissima. Just as the English merchants had Livorno, so Venice could count on Split. The portion of Venetian territory on the Dalmatian coast was scant, and the boundless Paese Turchesco began immediately beyond the border. The project of the Scala had to count on the organic cooperation of the Ottomans, or it could not exist. We have seen how Ottoman Bosnia corresponded to the western farthest ramification of a trade route whose cohesion was augmented by the unity of Ottoman rule. A whole stream of Indian and Anatolian goods arrived in Bosnia by caravan. Together with local products, these goods reached Sarajevo and then took different routes to the maritime coast to the west: Dubrovnik, Narenta, Makarska, Šebenik, Lech, Nova, being the most popular accesses to the sea. The Venetian project of allowing Balkan merchandise to converge in Klis and then Split was an attempt to clamp down on this fragmentation, preserving the cohesive nature of trade granted by the unity of Ottoman lands. In this sense, the territory ruled by Venice played its traditional role of natural continuation and maritime outlet of Ottoman lands. This picture is taken from the fortress of Klis, and you can see Split really close. I mean, Split is the marina of Klis. We may really talk about a natural continuation, although I don't like the adjective natural in historiography. The realization of the project could rely on an already well-established Venetian network in the area. A Conte was in charge in the port of Split, and another was in the nearby city of Zadar, both submitting to a Provveditore Generale di Satelmazia, also established in Zadar. These three public offices were assigned to patricians for 3 years. Moreover, just across the nearby Ottoman border, a Venetian consul, not necessarily a patrician, was appointed both in Klis and in Sarajevo. Daniel Rodriga, for example, had been in charge at the end of the 16th century. This institutional network, reaching deep into the Ottoman domains, was also the demonstration of the vitality of Venetian interests in the Balkans even before the actual establishment of the Scala. The target then became that of activating this network towards a new perspective, allowing the route from Sarajevo to Klis, to Split, and ultimately to Venice to become the preferential path for traded goods traveling westwards. In view of this target, the aforementioned network was integrated by other, not necessarily institutionalized, figures with the task of facilitating cooperation with the Ottoman authorities established in Skopje, Sofia, Sarajevo, and with the merchants at all levels. At this stage, the Venetian ruling class chose to keep a low international profile regarding the project, the key word being circospezione. It's fourth line, first word at your left. Venetians, where this is a document from the Cinque Savie alla Mercanzia, the trade board, mentioned by Tommaso. Venetians were particularly careful not to let the project become an international affair. On the contrary, they were playing their cards on a regional basis in order to reassess their hegemony on the contended transit of the Gulf. Who were, in fact, the competitors and who were the potential enemies? The emir of the port of Narenta and Sanjak Bay of Duca nourished a direct and indirect interest in trade. The first was the person to whom custom duties were entrusted, either in exchange of a salary or, more often in this area, of a share of the income called the iltizam, as already mentioned before. The second, the Sanjak Bey of Duca, was an administrative figure of middling importance, also appointed by the Sultan, who mediated between local demands and the Beylerbey. In those days, the passage of a caravan through a city meant dependable sources of income under many circumstances. It was therefore not even necessary for the political authorities to have a direct interest in the goods actually traded, which in many cases they had, in order to intervene in favor of one route or another. These two characters, the Sanjak Bey of Duca and the emir of Narenta, were neither the only nor the most dangerous competitors of the newly established Scala di Spalato. Certainly their bases were closer to Split than any other port town, and the growth of the latter would have deprived them of flow of international goods. According to the Cinque Savi, both of them were to be easily neutralized through the well-known strategy of the negozio, which in this case consisted of obtaining the support of a higher-placed authority, for example the Beylerbey of Bosnia, and other local figures playing on the rivalries between the servants of the Sultan. This strategy, which modern culture would classify as political or diplomatic, was on the contrary essentially organic to trade, the latter being an activity far more complex than we may assume today. The Ottoman functionaries often embraced the Venetian cause out of financial interest, with a share of the potential income being destined directly to them. Merchants from Ancona and from Dubrovnik, whose fortunes were subject to a sudden increase whenever a military controversy would pitch the Republic of Venice against the Ottoman Empire, were to be particularly annoyed by the establishment of an international port in Split. For sure, their opposition would have been more challenging than any other for the Venetians, since both of these cities could have turned to the Pope and asked for support. The Venetians were certainly unwilling to deal with the Pope's direct intervention in economic affairs concerning the Gulf. Moreover, the Pope's intervention would have been immediately supported by whom? The King of Spain, of course, both of them being affronted by the Venetian abandonment of the Holy League. In other words, better to pass for an undervalued regional power rather than to put up with religiously disguised political and eventually military interference. Moreover, both Spain and the papacy could easily count on a third, promising ally in their fight for hegemony in the Adriatic. The Austrian monarchy was taking, in fact, its first steps towards the Balkans, the Uskok piracy being its still irregular maritime force. Openly described in Venetian sources, circospezione can also be discerned in the Ottoman accounts of the time. The firm intention to avoid the direct involvement of the central government in this first stage has in fact been confirmed by an accurate research conducted upon the Sultan's letters to his representatives in Bosnia, in the Mühimmet and Ahkam Defterleri, that dealt with all topics but the Scala di Spalato. Often, the Venetians instructed the Bey of Klis, and through his mediation the Bey of Sarajevo, to realize infrastructures destined to facilitate the passage of caravans. Whether it was a bridge that needed to be built or a forest to be cleared in order to flush out the bandits, the Venetians informed the Ottoman authorities and asked for prompt intervention. In some cases, the tasks were accomplished by the local administration, although an intervention from Istanbul was frequently required, especially when permanent infrastructures such as bridges and caravanserais were planned. Whenever such circumstances occurred, the local authorities first informed the Venetians that contact with the central government was required. At this first stage, the Cinque Sardi would rather spend money out of the Republic's treasury than have the Sultan solicited on a project that was meant to be kept under wraps. After all, the heavy customs duty of the Mezzinoli, affecting the ships traveling to and from the rival ports of Narenta and Dubrovnik, was destined to cover the expenses needed for the construction of the lazaret and of any other infrastructure required for the full completion of the route, custom house, bridges, watchtowers, etc. The lazaret itself was of prime importance in Venetian strategy. The strict sanitary measures adopted by the Serenissima not only served the purpose of preventing dangerous epidemics, but also allowed the authorities to let personal interpretations of those very measures become the rule. Ragusan ships, for example, were captured and dragged into the lazaret for exasperating quarantines in order to delay the delivery of the goods they transported. The project of the Scala di Spalato became the center of Venetian trade politics up until the War of Candia. Together with the relatively good performance of the industrial sector, the stubborn defense of the split route may be considered as one of the measures that made the 17th century decline relative and not absolute, as far as urban living standards were concerned, as Rapp has already shown. As underlined by Renzo Pacci, Venetian fabrics kept circulating in the marketplaces of Sofia, Skopje, Sarajevo for longer than in the new and old trading centers of the Middle East, such as Aleppo, Izmir, and Cairo, where the competition of better fueled industries had been more successful. We didn't talk before. Moving a step further in the understanding of this epoch, this new project stood at the core of a larger political strategy, supported by an intransigent cultural standpoint, the independence of the state, and the hegemony over the Gulf, strenuously defended by Paolo Sarpi's distinguished interventions in the 17th century juridical and philosophical international debates. By rejecting the foreign interference on a legal, philosophical, and historical base in what the Republic of Venice considered as domestic space, Sarpi's argument of mare clausum provided direct support to the monopolistic project of the Scala di Spalato. The two implications of this standing point had been a fracture with the Pope on one side, economic cooperation with Ottoman Bosnia on the other. Historiography has not shed light yet on the connection between these two aspects. Someone who did was Sir Henry Wotton, the English ambassador to Venice, who shared with Paolo Sarpi an intense aversion for Jesuits, whom he wished to leave to Africa and, I quote, convert crocodiles, end quote. In 1606, he wrote to the Earl of Salisbury that the Spanish fleet had, and I quote, sacked Durazzo at the entrance of the Gulf, which will be imputed to the connivency of the Signory of Venice by the Turk, and doth not a little trouble them, folding out in such a conjuncture of other cases, end quote. Indeed, as will be demonstrated by the analysis of an event which occurred 10 years later, the Bosnian-Venetian connection could grow in an open alliance with Sultan Osman II. By 1617, the competition in the Adriatic had grown so bitter that the Spanish fleet abusively entered the Adriatic and attacked the Split convoy, where a copious group of Bosnian merchants was traveling home from Venice, loaded with recent purchases. After long consultation, the captains of the Venetian war galleys escorting the convoy decided to sail away, leaving the merchants to face their terrible threat alone. The ships were pillaged, though the merchants mostly kept their lives. A month later, 51 of them signed a petition to the Doge protesting the cowardice and shameful conduct of the Venetian captains. Their requests for reimbursement would find partial satisfaction only 4 years later. In 1620, Sultan Osman II ceded to the pressures of the Baino Giorgio Giustinian, who had asked him to clarify that the Republic of Venice bore no responsibility for damages incurred at sea. Soon after the event, his uncle Mustafa I had taken a diametrically opposite standpoint, representing the rights of his Bosnian subjects who were trading goods belonging to Vakf, pious foundations, that could not be plundered without impunity. Certainly impunity was not in Lorenzo Venier's thoughts when he attacked Dubrovnik in retaliation in the immediate aftermath of the Spanish raid against the Split convoy. Informed by the scandalized Ragusans themselves, Mustafa I asked Doge Giovanni Bembo whether the Capitano Generale del Golfo had acted by chance in response to the attack perpetrated to the detriment of Muslim merchants by the Spanish fleet, whose commanders had been informed by the Senate of Dubrovnik of the passage of the Split convoy. Indeed, the sequence of events stemming from the Spanish raid is instructive under many aspects. Firstly, although the crime had been technically perpetrated by the Spanish fleet, it was the Republic of Dubrovnik that had to be held morally responsible for it, as revealed by the retaliation enacted by Lorenzo Venier, Capitano del Golfo. Secondly, and in consequence of the aforementioned statement, the fronts of the conflict were composed as such: Venetians, their subjects, and Ottoman Bosnians on one side, Spaniards and Ragusans on the other. Last but not the least, at this stage, after almost 30 years since the project of the Scala had been realized and at the apogee of its functioning, still the Ottoman central government had not been directly involved, in spite of the promise of a mutual defense explicitly agreed upon in the Ahidname capitulation, reiterated by specific firmans with Sultan Ahmed I. This is Histura, openly speaking of Tarafeynün düşmanı İspanya. These are the second line, the end of the second line for those reading Ottoman script. It's written, the King of Spain being the enemy of both sides. Tarafeynün, with Arabic dual. The episode, nevertheless, was isolated and somehow demonstrates the effectiveness of the Scala. From both Venetian and Ottoman sources from the Beylerbey and Cadeau of Sarajevo emerged the picture of a fully developed trade route, resulting in mechanisms of diffused partnership and capital accumulation among merchants, Ottoman and Venetian subjects. As further comparative research on quantitative sources might demonstrate, I hope in the near future, the decades that preceded the Cretan War coincided with a golden age for the Balkans. Figures of demographic growth and urbanization rate seem to confirm this trend. Dalmatia and Split represented the core of a commercial system enhanced by the active cooperation of the Venetian central government and the Ottoman provincial institutions. In this context, the outbreak of the war in 1645 was perceived by many as an incomprehensible betrayal, conceived by the dysfunctional short-sightedness of 17th century court intrigues. Dalmatia happened to be a secondary front line during the 20-year-long War of Crete, and with Morea the main scenario of the last Ottoman Venetian Wars, which ended, as you know, in 1718 with the Peace of Passarovitz. From that moment onwards, the rising star of Austrian imperialism would cast an equal shadow upon the victors and the defeated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vera. Questions, comments? Anybody would like to lead? Question? I suppose one of the things that was just crossing my mind looking at the map, the heel of Italy, and just go back to that. So who controlled the heel of Italy? I mean, it's quite a picture.
Yeah, Spain, in fact. He knows Spain.
And so that's why it became such strategic. I was just wondering why the Spaniards got involved so much there. Very good. Okay, thank you. Philip.
Did the Ottoman caravans going up to Sarajevo, did they go on through the 18th century?
Yes, after the last Ottoman Venetian Wars. Yes, they did. And in fact, it is reported a sort of Venetian influence over the emergence of nationalisms. At a very early stage, I mean, there are records of, for example, the Bay of Morea writing to Francesco Morosini, saying, you may ask me whatever you want, but I won't betray the Sultan. Already saying, but I won't betray the Sultan is a little bit suspicious at the end at the beginning of the 18th century. So there's a sort already of
any other questions or comments? No? Okay, well, Vera, thank you very much indeed for that. And that brings then to the proceedings. What we'd like to do now is have a short panel, so Philip, Ansel, Vera, and myself, really to discuss, well, what next. So, Philip, if you'd like to come up and join us. So, this is, as we said at the beginning, our first significant venture into having a live event in Italy. One of the purposes is to build our network, build the group of people that are interested in Italian Ottoman studies. Venice is very much the natural focus for the first event, but we welcome your views on what would you like to see next. Is it another event? Is it more online talks? And really just get a little bit of feedback. Philip, do you want to add any comments at this stage?
Yes. Should there be regular events in Venice, or should maybe we think of one in Florence or Naples, or
what drove you to come to Venice? Other than the scenery.
Or maybe Venice is the natural and in fact the easiest place to get to.
Would you come here again?
Yes.
So the venue does matter. That's good. It's good to be clear about that, because we always bring the content to a good venue. So And are there any particular sort of topics or areas that we haven't explored that you think we should explore? Or would you prefer to have something that is more networking function, so less of a conference but more a social event? Anyone have any preferences?
I think both are important.
Both are important. So we need some substance, some content.
Yeah. We need to have something to talk about.
Yeah, we need to have the group photograph.
I think you have a good balance.
Especially with breaks.
Good. Too much food, maybe.
Well, we're going to have to eat.
We can reduce the catering. But okay, so that's good. But certainly breaks are important. The opportunity to chat throughout the day, I think, is important. And not to overload the programme. But have a theme. Vera, what about you? What are your thoughts on the conclusion of the day?
Well, for me, it was a pleasure to host you in Venice, and I really, what I said at the beginning of the day, that I thank you for giving me the chance to invite Tommaso Stefini and Francisco Pellanis. Is true, because in Venice, in my university, there is a little bit a lack of interest towards the Levantine issues, let's put it like that. So I feel less alone, and when one feels less alone, he's definitely happier, I guess. So I'm more than pleased to renew a cooperation with the Levantine Heritage Foundation. Possibly also a partnership with the Association of Italian-Turkish Friendship that I have the honor to represent. Certainly Venice is one of the places that can be more important, I mean, in defining a further topic of discussion. I don't know what that could be. I'm very interested in sources, primary sources. I think one of the advantages of hosting this seminar in Venice is the possibility to have access to scholars who deal with primary sources in Venetian and in Ottoman. It's lucky. There's nothing like that in place, unfortunately. We don't have the possibility to invite on a regular basis, for example, people from Istanbul or from Turkish universities or from other universities. We do that occasionally, but if the LHF is willing to help us in this sense, that could be really of great interest for us.
Perhaps in the future we could have more descriptions of the Venetian archives from the Ottoman Empire, what they contain, these relations and dispatches, but other more in-depth dispatches in certain years and why, and how much has been published and when, and what is going to be published in the future, and when do they stop, and what happened to the archives of the Palazzo di Venezia after 1797? Were they sent back to Venice, or did they get lost? What happens to the whole structure of the Venetian state in the Levant after the end of the Venetian Republic?
Yes, I have noticed that you are very interested in this transitional period.
Yes.
It's really, it's true, because sometimes you can, previous epochs can be revealed by what happened afterwards. And
We haven't really covered many family histories in any depth. We could sort of add some of that as well into the mix, but it's been quite an academic collection of talks, and certainly adding some elements of family history would be good. The other thought I had comes from the conference we had in Athens in 2018. As one of the events after the conference was a tour of the National Museum led by the curator. And I wonder whether there's something that we could do there to go inside some of the collections that we have in Athens. I mean, we look to you and our friends here to help organise that. John and I have been on that tour as well. I found that particularly insightful. So to try and get a mix of sit and listen, sit and participate, go out and see things, plus plenty of opportunity to talk. Does that sound right as a mix? Yes. And it definitely sounds as though we should continue to invest our time together.
And the culture of consumption, the shared culture of consumption we were talking about, maybe we could in the future have a paper on food influences, if that can be proven, and on literature, not just diplomatic expression. There's the L'Impresario di Smyrna of Goldoni. Were there other novels or poems about the Ottoman Empire?
Yes, of course. I mean, after you mentioned that this morning, after the at the end of the 17th century, after the second failed conquest of Vienna, the perception of the Ottoman Empire in the West, in Europe, changed completely. For the first time, it was perceived that the Ottoman Empire was starting to not to decay, that would be too much, but it was not invincible anymore. So they became curious of it. I mean, it started being a topic of curiosity. The first who perceived that were the Venetians with the Storia della letteratura turchesca of Giambattista Donà, and then Torellini, of course, later. But certainly, I mean, that the Ottomans had a literature that was something that the Venetians would have never said in the centuries before. Even if they knew that they had, they would never say that openly. They would never have an inquisitive scientific interest towards the Ottoman cultural world. I mean, the topics we could choose are innumerable. Because we could, for example, if you are interested in museums, the collection of the Penchik, of the Putti, taken by Francesco Morosini during the War of Morea, that could let us focus on the 18th century Venetian-Ottoman relations. That is a completely, interesting topic, quite different from all the epochs before. Because Venetians were a minoritarian group, trading group in the Levant. At that time they were resilient, as Tommaso would say, but they were certainly minoritarian. Or we could focus on consumptions, that's another topic. Really, there are innumerable. Maybe we should brainstorm a little bit and come out, the three of us, with some topics and then propose them.
And indeed, yes. So Jill and then Margaret.
I would be fascinated to know about the relationship at the time of 4053. That would be very interesting, and to hear about the sort of interface with Byzantines and the war between the two families and the invasion of 1453. I found that very interesting.
Okay. Marco, and then we'll go to Isabel.
You mentioned the name Morosini before, and I know that, for instance, the Campo Cenigo, the headquarters of the Guardia di Finanza here in Sao Paulo, has about 24 paintings that belong to the Morosini family that painted all these battles during the time of the conquering Korea and all the other fortresses and cities in Greece. And because I went to an exhibition last year, so 2 years ago, there, and they also have other objects. The rest of the collection includes 48 paintings others in the other palace of the Guerra di Finanza, Palazzo Lorenzo, Canaletto, and the Museo Corriere. So I'm not an art historian, so but it may be something that could be of interest. Maybe an art historian may give a lecture on maybe all 48 paintings, but maybe a selection of those, and people can see them. You may have an agreement with the Guerra di Finanza, go and see the palace, as well as the collection they have.
Great idea.
Yeah, it's a more general subject, but we were talking about slavery in the Mediterranean Sea. I think it's not a really well-known subject, so I don't know that any scholars are working on that. And also, I was thinking of piracy. Pirates, I mean, there were a lot of pirates because I worked on the French archives, on the consulate, French archives. They keep on trying to buy back slaves and to negotiate with pirates and so on. It takes a lot of consulate time. So maybe there's some scholars talking about work about that already.
Okay, good, thank you. Any other thoughts on this? Yes,
maybe I could. I'm very interested in what happened to the Ottoman diaspora, what happened to the Ottoman family when they were kicked out of Turkey, where did they end up, what did they do, and also the Greeks, an amazing diaspora around Europe and America. Where did they end up, what did they do? I mean, that's personal interest.
I mean, there is a whole area of diaspora studies, I think, which is worth an event to one its own. But I mean, whether it's here or not, I prefer to sort of
landed in water.
Yeah, and then we went to Sanremo. And then they came to Sanremo.
And then they came to Sanremo, and in fact, Vahidin, the last sultan, was a neighbor of Zonaro in Sanremo. Whether they saw it, they must have seen each other.
My father ships large as a midshipman. And in his journal he says that the party much enjoyed the deck hockey.
There's an Italian book on the last days of the Sultan at Sanremo, based on police archives. I cannot remember the name of the author. But another subject is the Greeks. Who did they prefer, the Venetian rule or the Ottoman rule in the Maria? And many people say it is well known that somebody has said in 1453, better the Sultan's turban than the Cardinal's hat. And maybe in the Maria, in the Peloponnese in the 18th century, actually Ottoman rule was lighter, it is said. Is that true?
It's difficult to say. There's a book by Fariba Zaminebaf.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, on this. I would try not to say whether it was better or worse, because it's better or worse for certain categories of people, as usual, as Benjamin Arber that's shown in Cyprus. Yeah, it depends.
Michel.
Yeah, I have 2 points. Perhaps we could, the research could be as well. We work on art because we saw some paintings, but there's much more on art. The research myself, I'm a specialist now from art and conflict resolution, and we use a lot of art. But at this period, I'm sure that you have the Hakawati, you have Khayal al-Zul, you have a lot to do, you know, with this troubadour and the mix between, I don't know if you want to compare, making a regard croisé between Italy and the Levant, or you just focalize on Levant. If you want to focalize on Levant, I didn't see a huge part of art. You know, I can see it on here, on your logo, like saying beautiful painting, but I didn't see it. The second thing, I didn't hear a lot about families. Beirut was a hub. I didn't hear the word Beirut. Beirut at the end, after smearing, after Egypt, they're still there, but all the families, they came to Beirut on one period. I didn't saw this period, and I didn't hear the word Safra, all the names, all the big families, the Picciotto, and even Greek families. And so I think that it could be a point. Perhaps you work at this university a lot about this subject, but you didn't mention it today. I didn't hear about it today.
Well, thank you. There's two things just in response. One, I didn't mention Beirut this morning because we were still discussing the possibility of an event, and I might as well get it out there. We are very keen to extend our network to include what I would call the Levant proper, if you say like Arab Levant. The next focus for us is to look at what could we do with Beirut, in particular with one or two big families there who have good archives, good material. Now you may wonder why Beirut isn't it a very difficult place to go to. It may have its challenges, but also life goes on. So it's something we're exploring, and I think that's an opportunity to see how we can develop that connection with the families. The other point really reminded me, I want to just sort of pay tribute to Miguel and some of the comments he made. I was quite struck by your model structure that you laid out. I do ask myself quite often sort of, well, why do we do this and why are we interested? I'm not suggesting that it's necessarily part of a conference, but I think it's something in the discussion that we have. What is it that really interests us? What is it that brings us here? How can we use that to identify the right formulas, the right content, the right conversations? So it's something perhaps we should have a further discussion about, Miguel. But thank you for raising it. It was quite thought-provoking. Any other thoughts, Philip?
Obviously, nation states are not the whole answer. They've failed in so many cases, particularly in the conflicts of the 20th century. So that is another reason to be interested in groups and cities that were not wholly national and not wholly under the control of one state. And indeed it's relevant, the future of cities, of mixed cities, always necessarily cosmopolitan, but certainly varied and multinational. What will happen to Odessa? What will happen to other mixed cities like London and Paris, or cities in America? Will they continue to function as before, or will there be more conflicts inside them? What will happen to Beirut? What is happening to Aleppo, in fact? It is being deconstructed practically. And ethnic cleansing is happening there as we speak.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. If you have further ideas, don't hesitate to get in touch. We will take them on board. We want to design things that work for you. And we have one last thing, one task for you before we finish, is that please will you all participate in a photograph to the conference. So, thank you very much for your participation. Thank you again.